Assalamu alaikum students. This is Dr. Samina Qasim, your personal development course facilitator. Today, I'm going to give you a lecture on listening skills. Agenda include difference between listening and hearing, importance of listening, stages of listening, reasons for poor listening, types of non-listening, types of listening. Someone rightly said, hearing is through ears, but listening is through the mind. Listening is defined as a combination of hearing sound and giving meaning to the message. Listening goes beyond hearing sound waves to include psychological involvement with the speaker and the message. Now, hearing nature is primary and continuous, whereas listening nature is secondary and temporary. Hearing involves receipt of message through ears. However, listening involves interpretation of the message which is received by the ear. Hearing process is passive bodily process. However, listening process is active mental process. Hearing occurs at subconscious level. Listening occurs at conscious level. Hearing reason is we are neither aware nor we have any control over the sounds we hear. Listening reason are basically we listen to acquire knowledge and receive information. For hearing, concentration is not required. However, for listening, concentration is required. You see, hearing is an involuntary action, right? And listening is a voluntary action. If you want to listen, then only you will listen. Hearing is something that is involuntary. Even if you don't want to listen, some sounds, waves, some noises comes into your ears, primarily or continuously, right? These are the difference between hearing and listening. Importance of listening. Listening is key to all effective communication. Without the ability to listen effectively, messages are easily misunderstood. As a result, communication breaks down and the sender of the message can easily become frustrated or irritated. If there is one communication skill you should aim to master, then listening is it. Listening is so important that many top employers provide listening skill training for their employees. This is not surprising when you consider that good listening skill can lead to a better customer satisfaction, greater productivity with fewer mistakes, and increased sharing information that in turn can lead to make or become more creative and innovative work. Many successful leaders and entrepreneurs credit their success to effective listening skills. Being a good listener is a part of having good management and good communication skills. People spend about 70% of each day in communication, more time in listening than in all other forms of communication combined. Stages of listening. Receiving, number one, then you understand it, remember it, then you evaluate it, and in the end, you give feedback. I'll explain you this one by one. Receiving. Receiving is the intentional focus on hearing a speaker's message, which happens when we filter out other sources so that we can isolate the message and avoid the confusing mixture of incoming stimuli. Understanding is the process of making sense of a message. Remembering is if the listener is unable to remember what the speaker was saying, chances are they were not effectively or actively listening. According to Harvard Business Review, we tend to forget up to half of what we have heard within the first 8 hours of listening to it. Evaluating It is actually judging the value of the message. People are more likely to evaluate a message positively if the speaker speaks clearly, presents idea logically, and give reason to support the points made. Responding or giving feedback. This is the last stage. It consists of giving observable feedback to the speaker. You can respond with the back channeling cues as well, like yes, okay, right, really, wow. Okay? So these are the stages that we have studied just now. You see the figure over here? You just receive the information, then you try to understand it, then you try to remember it. After remembering it, you try to evaluate it. And in the end, you give feedback in the form of yes, okay, things like that. Right? Reason for poor listening. What are the reasons for poor listening? It could be lack of effort, or the message is overloaded. There are too many thoughts racing into your mind. It can be psychological noise, physical noise, maybe hearing problem, or the faulty assumptions. Low concentration or not paying close attention to speaker is detrimental to effective listening. It can result from various psychological or physical situations such as visual or auditory distraction, physical discomfort, and indicate volume, lack of interest in the subject material, stress, personal bias, and jumping to conclusion. There are 7 types of non-listening. Faulty listening behavior include pseudo-listening, selective listening, defensive listening, ambushing, insulated listening, insensitive listening, stage hogging. I'm going to explain you this one by one. What is pseudo-listening? We call this pseudo-listening or faking attention. People who give appearance of being attentive with smiles, head nods, minimal responses, but behind this polite facade, they are ignoring or not attending to the other person. Such pretense may leave the speaker with the impression that the listener has heard some important information or instruction offered by the speaker, when this is not really true. You just take the example of your younger sibling, and like you are busy in some assignment, you're doing some assignment, and your sibling comes to you and say, brother, please listen to me. I made this. You just try to say, oh yes, I've seen, that's really nice, though you're not even looking into the picture what your sister has drawn, but you're just pretending as if you have seen that. This is what we say, fake attention, pretending that you have listened. Actually, you have not listened. See, faulty listening behavior. This is a child, she's showing a picture to her father, and the father is busy in the computer. She's trying to show her father what she has made. But father is saying that yes, keep on talking, I'm listening. Now this behavior is known as pseudo-listening. Selective listening. People who listen only to the parts of the message that interest them and reject or ignore everything else. Selective listeners have their own agenda of interesting and valuable topics and disregard or disinterest in other agendas. That means you are very selective in listening. Whatever interests you, gives you interest, you only listen to that part of the message and rest you ignore. Defensive listening is that people who take innocent comment or as personal attack. Defensive listening creates impression of insecurity and the lack of confidence. Ambushing. People who listen very carefully. However, they do so to collect information that can be used against that person. These people are constantly looking to ambush and trap the other person in their own ideas and word, usually to prove or support a strong belief of their own. Ambushing causes other to be defensive. This is totally the opposite of defensive listening. Here, what people try to do, such people, they carefully listen to you and they try to collect as much information as they can, so they can play with the words and use such words against that person. Ambushing causes other to be defensive, right? Stage hogging. People who are only interested in expressing their own ideas and who don't care about what others have to say on the subject. Stage hog do not listen to other person but give short speeches. For example, if you dominate conversation, interrupt to take over, or constantly change the subject to talk about you and your interest, you are actually a stage hog. Insensitive listening. The focus on facts, not feeling. They only hear factual elements others share and ignore verbal or non-verbal expression of emotion. As a result, they are usually totally unconscious to what others are really trying to communicate, and their responses show it. Insulated listening is basically the opposite of selective listener. Insulated listeners are only who actively avoid or ignore certain topics. When that topic arises in the conversation, they turn off. Now, types of listening. Two researchers named Wolven and Coakley have identified three types of listening. These three types of listening are the most common in interpersonal communication. First is informational listening, that means listening to learn. Second is critical listening, listening to evaluate and analyze. Third is therapeutic or empathetic listening. That means listening to understand feeling and emotion. I'm going to explain all this one by one. When in reality, you may have more than one goal for listening at a given time. For example, you may be listening to learn this while also attempting to be empathetic. That means you can have two type of listening at the same time, maybe informational listening or therapeutic or empathetic listening, right? Now, what is information listening? An approach we take when we want to understand another person. Whenever you listen to learn something, you are engaged in information listening. The goal of informational listener is to make sure that he is receiving the same thought the other person is trying to convey. That's very simple. Here, you try to listen to learn something. When you have this feeling of learning something, we are engaged in an informational listening. That's what we call informational listening. When you have the urge to learn something from the speaker, we call that informational listening. Critical listening. The objective of critical listening is to judge the quality of message in order to decide whether to accept or reject it. We are engaged in critical listening when the goal is to evaluate or scrutinize what is being said. Let's, for example, if a critical listener is listening to a speaker who is selling the product, so you will decide after listening to a speech whether you want to buy that or not. Here, what you're doing, you are doing actually critical listening. You are evaluating and scrutinizing what should be your decision, whether to buy it or not. Critical listening is appropriate when someone is trying to persuade you to buy a product, to act in a certain way, either to accept or reject a belief. Empathetic or therapeutic listening. What is it? This is actually that kind of listening in which the listener is trying to help someone cope with the problem by listening it from the person's point of view and giving support during the struggle for a solution. Counselors and therapists use therapeutic or empathic listening to understand and ultimately help their clients. What does empathetic mean? The word empathetic means has come from empathy. Empathy means selflessness. You are showing selfless behavior to the speaker, to the listener. You are trying to listen to your patient. Like for example, the psychologist listen to his patient with full empathy, with full attention, no matter how long it takes for him to understand and listen to the patient. Doctor listen and give maximum time as he or she can give to understand his patient problem, right? This is what psychologists do. Psychologists, counselors, and therapists, they all use therapeutic or empathic listening to understand and ultimately help their clients, their patients. This type of listening does not involve making judgments or offering advice, but gently encouraging the speaker to explain and elaborate on their feelings and emotions. This is all for today's lecture. I hope listening skills are quite clear to you all. If you have any query, you can ask me through my email address. Thank you so much.